Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 33 of the Beer Enthusiasts. We've got an oldie but a goodie with a new label. So Deschutes has been given a makeover to a lot of their beers, and Deschutes Obsidian Stout, a classic example of American stout. Surprisingly, a very difficult uh, style to find. It really shouldn't be, but it's just not as popular. So kind of these stouts and these kind of like lower 5 to 7% ABVs are becoming less and less
There used to be a pretty good
prominent.
trio of them, right? We could always find
Yep.
Sierra Nevada Stout, this one, um, once in a while like Bell's Kalamazoo, but I
Yeah,
guess the
Bell's
distributor just
Kalamazoo for
stopped
sure.
bringing this one into Southern California. We keep finding it elsewhere, so
Yeah, and then I think North Coast, like Old World number 38 or whatever, we used to never get it, and then they took it off the BJCP, and now it's like everywhere I go. So that's fun. So, all right, Chris, did you look into some ingredients or any info about this beer for us?
yeah. So I mean, this beer's been brewed for a really long time, and it's we kind of hinted that it's one of the stalwarts of American Stout, and it's really it stinks a little bit that that style is harder and harder to come by. It's imperial stout and up. It seems like in the United
Yeah.
States, and all the variations thereof. But these, like you said, 5 to 7% American stouts are such a good option when you want a lot of that flavor and aroma, but not nearly as much alcohol. You can actually have one and keep your wits about you. But this beer, like most, is brewed with a really you can be really creative with the mix on the grist on these. This one's got a little bit of everything, right? It's got some base two row, but then some caramel malts, some chocolate malts, some roasted malts, even I think a pinch of roasted barley, um, and then it's got. I think they've maybe changed the hops a little bit over the years. It's not meant to have like a
Hmm.
particularly unique hop flavor, I don't think, but it is in the past it's been pretty bitter beer by the time you're compounding some of the roasted bitterness and the hop bitterness, but it's not supposed to taste like black IPA levels of hoppy. It's just got to have a nice real firm bitterness. So I think the website says Delta and Northern Brewer hops now, but I'm sure that they've tinkered a little bit, especially with the bittering hops. It's a little bit less important in this style exactly what your bittering hops in particular are. So yeah, and then kind of whatever their house ale yeast is, I'm sure. But yeah, you have all these levers and dials to pull when you're making stout because you can lean a little bit more into the sweet and caramelly. You can shy away from that and go into more roasty, kind of like dark chocolate, roasted barley type characters. And I haven't had this one for a minute, but my memory is that it leans into the more aggressive, kind of like roasty, dark side of American Stout. And so we'll see if we can confirm that. But that's what I've always enjoyed about American Stout, is just how creative you can be with the grist. Throw a little bit of rye in there if you want. Some other specialty malts, some Munich, anything you want to kind of like beef up and layer this really almost like decadent profile, even though this one only comes in at 6.4%. But yeah, just meant to be, a bump up from American Porter, kind of a little bit roastier, a little bit hoppier, just kind of the slightly bolder, but not as bold as Imperial Stout sibling to the American Porter.
Absolutely.
And it's a pretty one, that's for sure. I mean, it is like almost jet black. It's like the deepest brown imaginable. Um,
Yeah,
and
I'm not even seeing anything at like the edges of the glass or anything. Even when I hold it up to the light, there's no like highlights or anything. It's pretty darn black. Ooh, okay.
It smell good. Sorry, I think one of us is
Yeah,
cutting out a little bit. We'll catch up, but
yeah. Yeah, no, it smells good. There's definitely this very like extremely almost like dehydrated like pine needle.
mhm.
There's like there's like freshly crushed espresso bean, like dark cocoa powder. Again, kind of like you said, it's really leaning and kind of this is where, like you said, you kind of hinted at it. This is kind of really where you have to distinguish yourself from American porter because that's a question I think a lot of people have on their minds, and maybe why one of the two styles kind of just had to and maybe eventually just fell out of favor is because people kind of couldn't really tell the difference, and so it's like kind of stout kind of moved into the imperial and the pastry and the barrel aged, kind of portion of it. And, maybe, porters are still kind of, in that realm too, but not nearly as much as stout. And, kind of porters just kind of seen as a little bit, could be a little bit more in like the sessionable realm. There's English versions, of it. Um, but
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, the what defines a stout has shifted over the many years that beers like this have been brewed. Historically speaking, the difference between stout and porter was just strength. I mean, they were even
yeah,
English breweries were even party guiling these beers, right? So they're making different strengths of exactly the exact same recipe based on kind of runoff and blending, and so this idea that the difference between stout and porter has always been like roasted barley is in stout but not in porter is at least historically a myth. They're they're just different strengths of the same recipe at their root. Now, contemporarily, that's true in a lot of instances, and I think I would just err to
yeah,
whatever the brewer likes to call it, because you even see imperial porter as a style label, and like imagine
yeah,
how confusing that is for the consumer if you learn that stout's just a strong porter and then you see imperial porter and it's like, well, what's the difference between imperial porter and stout? It's a little bit tough to say, but it's just you know read as much about the recipes as you can and go with what the brewer is intending for it to be. And I think those are the two main differences. It's either going to be a little bit stronger version of the same brewery's porter, or it's going to have more aggressive roast and hop character. And that's a good way to think
yeah,
of it.
yeah. I think that's a pretty good way to designate it. And like you were mentioning, I mean, it can definitely lean into having a little bit of hop bitterness, but also the roasted bitterness on top of it. And I really feel like that's where this is um, leaning. And I would say that, I would say there's a pretty identifiable, kind of like maybe not American, maybe not like totally American, hop character. There's kind of a woodsy edge to it. There's a little bit of like this, kind of like really, again, kind of just like really dried, almost like tree bark, pine needle, maybe even kind of like some, maybe with the roast kind of turning into some kind of like burnt, like mint kind of,
Mm-hmm.
kind of character to it. As well, but again, the roasted bitterness and the hop bitterness lead the perception to be um, uh, while quite firm, but not really one that seems to be lingering all that much.
Well, it's got, I mean, we've tried to explain this with different beers in the past, the difference between like a unduly harsh bitterness that lingers or one that has a pleasant build to it, right? Because you would not confuse this for being not bitter. I mean, it's a bitter beer. I'm sitting here drinking it, but it's like builds and builds and builds, almost like dissolving, like a 85% plus cacao in your mouth. It's just got these unfolding layers of
Mm,
roasty, dark bitterness, and it is a little bit difficult to figure out where the roasted malt slash barley bitterness begins and or ends, and then the hop bitterness begins. But I think you're onto something that it does not presenting as totally American in the sense of like you're not getting like waves of citrus or grapefruit like you might in a black
yeah,
IPA, but you are getting something woody and kind of herbaceous that is in the realm of pine needle, and foresty type flavors. So that's what makes it stick out as American to me. including just the aggressivity of it. Right, it is. I think I've seen it listed in different places at 55 IBUs,
Absolutely.
and it is every single one
Yeah,
of
it doesn't seem
those.
to be. Oh wow, I didn't realize it was that high. I know one thing they used to do with this beer is they used to bottle condition it, and I
Mm.
wonder if they're still doing that.
Yeah, I'll have to look more into that. I didn't. I didn't find any updates on that. They do on the label. They reference um, what it's named after, the kind of volcanic obsidian rock, and then
Hmm.
um, black barley and roasted malts deliver a depth of flavor that promises enjoyable notes of espresso and chocolate. Um, Definitely there on the espresso, and the chocolate's presenting as a very very dark chocolate.
Hmm.
There's a little bit of fermentation fruitiness under there too. It might be malt fruitiness. I don't really know, but there's kind of a, some might call it licorice, some might call it like a stewed plum character. It is not intensely fruity, but once that first wave of bitterness crashes, you kind of have some of the retro nasal and everything else kind of lingering. It is nice and fruity underneath that.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting almost like a red apple skin. But yeah, I like the licorice note too. Yeah, but there's this supportive malt sweetness that's leading to a finish that I wouldn't just say, with all these notes, I would just think that this is going to be somewhat overtly like dry, but it's not. It's fairly well. I mean, it's maybe slightly balanced towards towards bitterness, but I would say for the most part, you know this is not overtly decidedly one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a tricky sensation, much like having a really good, very dark chocolate is,
Yeah.
because there's sweetness in there. There's at least a little bit of sugar in a even a
Hmm.
very very dark or high percentage cacao bar. So like everything up front tastes kind of like bitter and dark and deeply roasty. But then you almost have. I'm not saying this in a negative way at all. I think it's really pleasant, but like a film. It's not like a sugar film, but it's just like everything is kind of coalesced on your palate, and it's kind of hanging out and mingling
Yeah.
after a couple of sips, and so it's like you're getting a little bit of sweetness, but your mind's like, well, how am I still getting all this bitterness too? So it's playing both of those cards.
Yeah, and I think in the BJCP guidelines, I think they use the word smooth, which can be maybe a kind of too vague of a descriptor. But I think what you're saying, where there's this interplay where it's not decidedly dry and sort of light in that way, but it's also not. I wouldn't describe it as creamy either.
Yeah,
And so maybe that's kind of the best way to kind of talk about the middle area is that it's just smooth and it's not overtly playing one side or the other, or if it is, it's a slight tug of war, but you don't really know who, if you were watching it, you wouldn't know how one side's going to decidedly win this exchange. Um, and it never does. There isn't anything that seems to even be able to build. This is sixth, seventh sip, and it's not like, oh, okay, like the bitterness is taking over. It's building. It's building. There's this malt backbone that seems to be, again, while not sort of overtly, not a ton of like caramel sweetness or toffee sweetness or anything, but just enough threads in there that seem to bring balance to the beer. And again, with the ABV and with this sort of interplay, leads to um, something that if you just wanted to crush it, you could, and if you wanted to just sip it for a while and kind of enjoy the complexities of the darker malt character, this is for both of those parties.
yeah, and we're really dissecting it on that matter. But if you've had a bunch of sweet stouts or pastry stouts, and you're looking to kind of pull back the curtain to a more old school style American stout, and you haven't had Obsidian Stout in a while, please march out and get this, because I think it's really going to like reawaken your senses to that experience of having like a really scrumptious like black coffee, that you're not just like dumping a bunch of pumps of caramel or frothed milk into. And I like what you said about the hints of sweetness and some other things going on, but there's not really like a caramel center to it. It's almost this like peripheral off dryness or like semi sweetness that you're getting there, and that makes it so ironically different than every other stout that you can get right now. So that's a breath of fresh air, even though this is an old recipe.
Yeah, and I would also say that that really, I think, kind of takes maybe any sort of nervousness that one might have to, use this beer for pairing, because you might think if it's just going to be overtly bitter and roasty, it's going to be hard to maybe find some, good complements that, where you're not just building upon roast that maybe you don't want to, you maybe don't want to do that, but again, not having to go, maybe completely stray away from something that's got some sweetness to it. And so getting to, kind of where we like to, kind of be in pairing where it's just not too many extremes that are going on. And so we're able to have some, again, some sort of interplay with lots of different of, basic tastes or flavors, and finding good, complements in there, but also some interesting contrasts that will keep things interesting. So what did you come up with for something savory?
Well, so I want to play that bitterness, that kind of really firm bitterness is reminiscent of some bitter greens to me, and I want to play around with. Well, I kind of have like an amalgamation of a bunch of ideas that we always have. So, here we are, the beer enthusiasts. It happens. Um, but the first, so here's the dish. The dish I want to make a quiche, but I want to use like endive as a bitter green to have in that, and a little bit of gorgonzola too. So we've got this kind of like salty, bitter, eggy, kind of brunchy thing. And it's got you make essentially like a pie crust, or use puff pastry or whatever um, as your base. And I think that would be like a really nice complement to the other kind of specialty malt characters that are in here without 100% duplicating them, because it's there's no like pie crust flavor in this beer, and there's none of that like sweeter bread type characteristics. So hopefully this can like layer into that a little bit. But back to kind of some of the things we like to talk about a lot. One is I think this could just in that situation with maybe a little bit of bitterness from the beer complementing and or canceling some of the bitterness of the endive that's in the quiche. Um, could leave you with this being sort of your cup of coffee with your quiche. So, so we're in a breakfast of brunch land, which we just love to be in as is. And then, something really sneaky about cheese and beer that you and I have been noticing over some of our study sessions is that even some of the mildest cheeses end up being too intense for a lot of beers. And this beer presents the opportunity. So we're in stout land. It's a strong beer compared to the vast majority of beers in the world, but it's nothing compared to imperial stouts. And people are always saying imperial stout with blue cheese. And I'm going with, the slightly tempered version of blue cheese, some, more mass market gorgonzola, because I want that saltiness to take the sting out of some of the bitterness of both the endive and the beer itself. But you put like some really funky blue cheese in something like that, and all of a sudden, even this beer it might not catch up to the intensity of that dish. So that's just like our own version of our own personal warning that all the kind of common sense pairings that you hear about was just like blue cheese and double IPA or blue cheese and imperial stout or Gouda in any beer or whatever. It's just like there are 1,000 different intensities of American stout, there are 1,000 different intensities of blue cheese. So I would pick one that's middle to less intense on the blue cheese scale, and we're just getting a little bit of those pangs of salt to take the sting out of the bitterness, That salty and bitter combo is always nice. And then then we're left with this is the coffee to our quiche is what I'm hoping for that. So endive and blue cheese quiche. How about you for savory?
I had a lot of similar, sort of ideas, just kind of in a different package. Definitely thinking about a beer that's going to potentially be as bitter as this. I'm almost always going to lean towards something salty. You went with gorgonzola. Mine's going to be Parmesan. I'm going to do like a stuffed mushroom. We can do. I would even say going as far as doing something like a almost like a spinach artichoke, kind of stuff to, kind of with a little bit of like the cream cheese thread in there to kind of play with the chocolate. That's going to be a familiar pairing, but also kind of like the unctuousness of warm, cream cheese with the brightness of the roasted malt character is going to lead to a good contrast. The kind of earthiness of the spinach and the earthiness of all of these hop notes is going to be, I think, a really good, again, kind of like complement that doesn't feel like it's exactly the same at all. The saltiness helping to temper the bitterness, and then having this kind of like roasted, character boosting the umami of the mushroom. Maybe a little bit of that sweetness playing with the savoriness as well, being kind of part of the whole experience. And then if you're maybe wanting to, add a little bit more of that malt complexity that maybe is, kind of missing or draw some of it out, I think just, a sprinkle of toasted panko on top of that would be a great little addition too.
That's very, very yummy sounding. I like that a lot. And I thought about like adding mushrooms to my quiche too. So we're always looking for excuse to add mushrooms. And that like dark roasty bitterness is
That's
such a
right.
good cut to umami
Yeah.
fat. Like, I've got the fat with the eggs, and you've got the couple different kinds of cheeses that you're stuffing in there. And yeah, and this beer, all the roasty character, most of the roasty character, to me is much more like coffee or chicory. It's less outwardly chocolatey. There's obviously chocolate notes in here, but you don't have to worry about feeling like you're pairing like a milk chocolate thing with savory. It's not going to come across like that. It's going to come across more like roasted roasted coffee bitterness type uh, character than it is like pairing chocolate bar with savory food or something like that. So I think that's pretty good for desserts. Dessert can be tricky generally, but I think that um, I wonder what you think about this. You've alluded to it already, but I think we're at a bitterness level here and a quality and kind of bitterness that we can have some sweet and bitterness at just kind of its like raw level cuts sweetness. When the both of those levels are high, it clashes more than has like a valuable cut. But I think since the quality and the flavor of the quality of the bitterness and the hop and roast flavor um, are kind of like really deep and unfolding, that we can get away with some sweetness as long as it's not sickly sweet. And I want to. There's a kind of small chain of well-known bakeries out here called Portos, and they do. I forget what they call it. It's like a besito, like a little kiss. It's like a Hershey Kiss shaped
Okay.
uh,
Hmm.
cookie. So the outside is like a not sugar cookie. What are the pecan sandies made out of? The like I'm totally blanking the kind of cookie that it is. Shortbread. It's like the
Okay.
like a shortbread cookie in the shape of a Kiss, and it's got like their take on dulce de leche caramel in the middle. And we've both kind of identified that caramel, despite this having some caramelized malts in it, is not like a big factor in this beer. Um, so, that cookie has a caramel center, and I want to like inject a caramel center into this beer too. So maybe that will work in some complementary favors. The cookie itself, like a shortbread cookie, isn't usually not too sweet. It's got kind of this like crumbly, lightly sweet texture to it, in the same way that the like pie crust type dough to the quiche can kind of like insert some bready complexity into the beer. I'm hoping that the shortbread cookie can do a little bit of that as well. And yeah, maybe that the that dulce de leche um, kind of caramel sweetness can get us into caramel macchiato territory
Mm,
with this combination. So we're
I
making
like that.
instead of just drinking black coffee, we're drinking some kind of caramel latte when we combine it with our cookies. So hoping that works a little bit. How about you?
I kind of had a similar, thread with the caramel, but I was definitely kind of trying to figure out how can I include some sense of like savoriness or saltiness into a dessert, and stumbled upon a recipe for homemade marshmallow that's infused with a little bit of bourbon, and then basically doing like adult s'mores. So like a bourbon infused homemade marshmallow, kind of rectangle square, a caramel infused milk chocolate bar, and graham cracker, and throw on throw on a slice of bacon. And again, you're getting kind of the graham cracker, kind of trying to play with the any sort of like base, malt, or sort of caramel malt threads that might be underlying there. You're getting actual caramel infused into that. You're getting a different, sense of chocolate. You're not trying to add more dark chocolate onto, dark chocolate. You're adding to kind of the like levels of chocolate complexity. You're going to get all the marshmallow is just going to be an amazing complement to all of the chocolate character, all of the roast character. But really, for me, if there's any just sense of bourbon, and it's really just kind of working out with I wasn't sure how the hop character was going to present, but the fact that it does present more kind of like woodsy and with a little bit of pine, and some of this kind of roast character. I mean, you're almost like building your own kind of like oak, kind of complexity with all of those things playing together. So that just, I think, kind of works out, fortunately for me in the end. But also, if that didn't play, it's going to play with the chocolate. It's going to play with all that other stuff. So I think it just is going to work out on other levels that I wasn't expecting. But um, yeah, definitely going to get again. There's going to be a lot of unctuousness in there, a lot of savoriness. That roast character is going to contrast. This is pretty. Pretty, in the kind of like medium to medium high carbonation level. And, there's going to be, bitterness cutting, carbonation cutting. Roast is going to be accentuating some things. The roast is just doing a lot, is doing a lot in pairing. And I would just implore people it can be, I remember early on, it was just really easy to kind of just, if there was roast, it was just kind of easy to just say, let's just go straight to grill marks and then just kind of move on with our lives. But if you really get into the weeds, there's a lot that roast does. It's quite the player in pairing.
Seriously, and also with this beer at a lower ABV than some of those big burly imperial stouts, you could, often people are like, just pair stout with steak or whatever, and it's probably going to be pretty darn good. But if you're a little bit less on the intensity scale in terms of the roast and the alcohol, then you could get away with the roast, this latching onto roast marks of a bunch of different stuff, grilled vegetables, grilled chicken, some lighter meats that you wouldn't normally pair with like an imperial stout still might be pretty
Yeah.
tasty with this. So, yeah, I also really really love that we've done this both like academically in terms of practicing for our exams and all that, but also just thinking through it. If you if you think of a dish to go with a beer and it feels too simple, elevate it. Figure out how to elevate it. Make it something just like a little bit more adult, a little bit more modern, and a little bit more complex. And see if that version of it in your mind kind of matches up a little bit better. And I think you've done that with adult s'mores. It's not just your childhood s'mores. It's like let's layer in some bourbon. Let's home make the marshmallow. A lot of thought going into that. So that's great. That's just like good advice. If you think your pairing is too simple, think back through the food component and how you could elevate it, make it a little bit more than just what it is.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing I didn't even really think about too. If you wanted to add another sort of layer to that, the thing I'm thinking of is just doing a homemade marshmallow thing, and you're just kind of having it in your house. But if you just do the homemade marshmallow thing, and let's say you don't want to do the bourbon thing, maybe you just don't want to infuse it with bourbon. Just make sure you just take a home kind of like handheld butane torch and just get a little toast on there and get a little smoky, smoky with it.
Mm.
That was another thing I was thinking with the lower ABV. With the while this is a little bit bitter, you can't go like super duper spicy, but you can kind of start to play in like tomatillo and kind of like these maybe less spicy peppers that you can just where you just see these YouTube chefs where they're just have direct fire stoves and they're just like basically putting it straight onto the stove, and
Mm.
just completely, getting that kind of like blackened outer layer, but then having that kind of little smoky edge, yeah, edge to it. I think that can be an interesting layer of complexity that you could play with.
Yeah, you got my mind wandering big time because I mean, it's such I already mentioned steak, and it's like this might not match the intensity of your biggest, kind of fattiest, juiciest steak, even though it's got a lot of big flavors in it. But if you want to do carne asada tacos, which is a much thinner kind of like skirt steak, and like you said, they're like really um, grilling those over mesquite, getting all those marks on there, and kind of almost like this deep grill marks and cooking them pretty fast. That brings a little bit of smoke, a little bit of other like wood and smoky aroma character. That's not going too far, right? Like well, I was going to say having this with Texas barbecue might not work, but that could work in a lot of instances too. But the point just being, a kiss of smoke sounds really nice. So.
Absolutely. Wow, that was fun. Yeah, I man. Well, folks, if you're seeing people brewing this, there's no reason not to try and bring American Stout back, even if it's just for the food pairing part of it. Um, so as we always say, at the beginning we kind of were digging into these styles that were a little bit more, a little easier to find, things that we thought people could kind of join in, but we're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit with styles we haven't covered yet. And as we always say, if people are making this, try and support them in that. And the other thing is, we've been kind of the past few weeks, we kind of been having trouble just having beers kind of waiting in the wings, because we're trying to hold out for these styles that we're really trying to find, or trying to find something unique that we haven't done before. And we have 2 weeks worth of beers that we know we have them, and we actually have them like in hand and like ready to go. So next week we're going to be talking about Celador the Smoke, which is a brewery here in Southern California, and this is their take on Lichtenhainer, which is kind of a little bit of sour, a little bit of smoke. So that's good. That's a very niche style. So if you can find something like that, or maybe even just if you can find something that's kind of in the smoked Helles, range, you're going to be getting relatively close. And then the week after that, we have Bayerischer Bahnhof Leipziger Goza. So hopefully you've got a brewery that's making a Goza, or at least a fruited Goza. I mean, there's plenty of those out in the market, but just finding kind of just like your straight base Goza isn't always the easiest thing. So start looking around, start shopping now. Chris thankfully was able to snag some of that for us, so we're going to get a chance to do what I think will be a fun deep dive into a cool style.
Absolutely. Moral of the story, grab some Deschutes Obsidian Stout or your favorite local kind of regular strength American Stout, and enjoy along with this video. Comment if you got some ideas for pairings. Still love to hear from people. While you're doing that, make sure to subscribe, watch the videos, share them, and interact with us however you can. We're just busy plodding along, studying, and using this as an
Yeah,
excuse to air out our ideas and grievances. So feel free to tag in and play around with us. So we appreciate you watching and hanging out with us.
cheers everybody.
Cheers.